Hey there, it's the Redneck Preppy with you in the latest edition of ISIS hostage home videotapes. I love this setup. And today we're going to be looking at a question that I get fairly frequently, not surprisingly perhaps. Redneck, all them old guns you shoot, is it actually safe to do that? And I'm going to give you the exact answer that I give every single one of them. Very clear and definitive. I don't know. Depends. Because it does depend on a number of different factors, some of which I'm going to be going through in this video. I do need to state at the beginning that this isn't an all-encompassing video. It's not meant to be. I'm not a certified and licensed and trained gunsmith, so everything I'm going to tell you is based on my own personal experience. Which kind of leads me to my first point, and you could actually effectively stop watching this video right now as soon as I say this. If you have any doubts on a firearm that you're shooting, whether it is new, whether it is old, and anything in between, get it checked out by a licensed, certified, and experienced gunsmith. Period. End of story. Okay, they're the experts. They'll tell you whether it's safe to shoot. Now that we got that out of the way. So old firearms bring with them a number of potentially interesting and unique problems and scenarios and whatever. Age. Age does not necessarily imply that a firearm is going to be unsafe. But age, particularly when it comes to old firearms, particularly military surplus rifles, which often have had a pretty difficult and tough life, and then the intervening years, decades, century, may have seen indifferent cleaning, repair, whatever it may be. So there could be some issues in that. So these are some of the things that I do when I'm either buying a firearm or preparing to shoot a firearm for the first time that, you know, is aged and may have issues. The first one is check the barrel and the bore. Look for things like deep pitting inside the barrel. That's usually indicative of rust that has been inside the barrel, cleaned at a certain point, and all the rust that was taken away has now left pitting in the metal. Pitting in itself isn't always an issue that could cause safety problems, depending on the level of the pitting. If it's just light surface pitting, safety-wise, you're going to be okay. Your accuracy might suck a little bit. If you see deep pitting, that's when you have to start questioning whether you want to shoot this, because, pitting is essentially removing of the material in the barrel. That's all it really is. It was converted to rust, it was removed, and now you've got pits inside the barrel. Checking it out with a camera, bore camera, might be able to give you an idea as to how deep that pitting is and whether it's safe to shoot. The deeper the pitting, the less safe it is to shoot. At a certain point, so much material has been eaten away by the rust that you could potentially see a barrel blow out while you're shooting it, and could cause you some problems. Other things to check for are bulges in the barrel, and bulges in the barrel are usually caused by some sort of obstruction that was in the barrel when it was shot at some point. Oftentimes might just be oil, and it creates a hydraulic effect where it bulges the barrel. Again, not necessarily unsafe, but more often than not, I would not shoot something like that. So if you see barrel bulge, that's a rifle that you might want to avoid shooting. There are mechanisms for bringing in that bulge and restoring the barrel's line. Not something I particularly trust, because you've stressed the metal out and then you've stressed the metal back in. There are ways to detect whether barrel bulge has been addressed. Again, beyond the purview of this video, you'll find stuff on YouTube and in the internet in general that'll show you the signs of a bulged barrel. Another thing you might want to check is the chamber. If you're capable of doing it, taking a cast of the chamber and seeing what it looks like. Because sometimes it's a little difficult to, get a good look in there, even with a light. Another thing is, the throat of the chamber into the barrel, whether that's been eroded through hot loads or just shooting over, decades, centuries of time. That could cause some issues as well. Another thing that you might want to think about when shooting old rifles, and handguns for that matter, is sometimes ammunition is really scarce for these things, so you have to reload the ammunition for them. Certainly a problem that I face with several of my firearms, and what you should do is be careful with substituting smokeless powder for black powder if the rifle was originally designed for a black powder round. There's a lot of information out there on how to substitute and substitute safely. But in some cases, I'm still always leery about doing so, because there's a tangible difference between black powder and smokeless powder that a lot of people who don't look at the technical data perhaps aren't aware of. Black powder, the pressure curve tends to be flatter than smokeless powder, which kind of ramps up immediately. Why that might play a part in creating an unsafe situation is the metallurgy of the rifle. The further back actually that you go, the less sophisticated metallurgy was when it came to firearms. And there are rifles that are relatively recent, I'm talking 1880s, 1890s, which were designed for black powder. And frankly, the metallurgy, the metal itself, isn't capable over a long-term usage of having smokeless powder rounds run through it. So that's something that you might want to take into account. For the most part, you're probably going to be okay if you're responsible with your loads and you do a lot of research and talk to people who've done it. You're probably going to be all right, but it's still something to take into account, substituting smokeless powder for black powder in really old rifles. Next, do some research into the potential pitfalls of shooting that particular firearm. A lot has changed over the last couple of centuries, hell, even the last century of firearms design that you just might not be aware of. And I'm not just talking about, the shift from smokeless powder or black powder to smokeless powder. I'm talking about even within ammunition, which is ostensibly the same today as it was a century ago. And a good example of that is rifles that were designed to fire round nose ammunition versus Spitzer rounds. The Gewehr 98, which is the forerunner to the Kar 98K, was originally designed to shoot 8mm Mauser, same round as we use today, but it was designed to shoot with round-nosed bullets. During its lifetime, it was modified to take advantage of the Spitzer bullet, which a lot of militaries began to shift to just before and during World War I. The Germans modified that rifle to fire Spitzer ammunition, and on the receiver you'll see an S to denote that it has been changed to the new 8x57, I think it's JS, whatever it is, ammunition. But as long as it has that S, you can fire Spitzer cartridges through it. Can you fire Spitzer bullets out of a Gewehr 98 that doesn't have that S? Do you want to take the risk? It wasn't designed to do that, and you might have feed problems, but it's still a potential pitfall. So a good place to find a lot of information on what it is that you can do with your firearm in terms of ammunition or how things have changed. Go to gunboards.com, local gun stores, books. I know it's crazy these days, but books are still a good source of information. Another thing that you might want to look at is check to see if it's been modified, particularly internally. A lot of people over the century think that they're the equivalent of, the great gun designers of the 20th century. Patterson, Browning, Garand, all those people. And they modify their firearms. And it might be something just as simple as, polishing up trigger sears so that they get a smoother pull. But it could also be a lot worse than that. Modification of bolts, modification of, magazines and receivers and that stuff. And that could create issues that you're not aware of as well. So find out what it's supposed to look like and then compare what you have to what it's supposed to look like. Might save you some problems. Another potential pitfall that I should have mentioned, I'm going to mention it now, is cleaning it. A lot of people, when they buy firearms, they don't clean them before they take them out to shoot, which is a horrible idea. It's not as common today as it used to be, but a lot of things were stored in the cosmoline in their, tissue paper wrapping and all that stuff, and taken out of that wrapping and just shot. Horrible idea, because cosmoline doesn't just depart on its own unless you clean it specifically. And let me give you a good example of that. SKS 45s to a certain year were manufactured with a free-floating firing pin. Ivan, when he stored his rifles, Cosmo'd the hell out of everything. Put it in everywhere you possibly could. A lot of people tended, when they got those rifles out of the cosmoline, would clean the surface, the chamber, the wood, whatever it may be, to get rid of that cosmoline. But they rarely took the bolt apart to clean out the cosmoline that was inside. So you get firing pin, which over time, because the accretion of carbon, dirt, dust, whatever it may be, would suddenly become fixed in that SKS 45. Over time, that firing pin would get stuck forward, and then when you shot around, come back, pick up another one, the firing pin was already out, boom, 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 and they would go through a whole magazine of slam fires. That's got the attention of some police forces, particularly up here in Canada, who want the SKS 45 banned because they view it as easily modifiable to an automatic firearm. It's not, of course, it's a cleaning issue, but might sound cool to have an automatic SKS 45, but it's probably terrifying when all of a sudden you're running through a whole magazine of ammunition, and it'll probably get your ass kicked off the range too. So clean your firearms before shooting. Another tip I have is don't make things happen. If you don't know how an old firearm works, do some research. Find out. Some of these firearms from a century ago and that stuff, when firearms technology was still kind of in a bit of flux, where people trying to figure out what was the right way of doing things, had some weird mechanisms. If you want a good lesson on that, go watch some forgotten weapons videos on firearms from like the 1900s, the early 1900s. And you'll see some really goofball stuff as to what people thought firearms should work like. If you don't know, look, find out. That also goes for assembly and disassembly of firearms, because, again, a lot of people, they don't know how to assemble or disassemble firearms. Even the M1 Garand, like, a lot of people don't know that, trigger, guard, out, mechanism pops apart and all that stuff. They don't know how to do all that stuff. They don't know how to disassemble a M1911A1. Simplest handgun in the world, but you wouldn't know if you don't know. So do some research on how to assemble and disassemble your firearm so you can also properly clean it. Also, it allows you to check to see if things are broken. Springs, ejectors, firing pins, things like that. All those things can have a safety impact if you don't actually check them. I think that's basically about it. Like I said, it was just going to be a quick and dirty video. Shooting firearms that are a century and a half old, like I do regularly, can be very safe, just as long as you take adequate precautions. So, do what I do, check the firearm, do my research, try and learn as much as I possibly can about it, do as much, discussion with experts, find out what they have to say, and you should be okay. If you have any doubts, like I said at the beginning of the video, go to a certified, legitimate gunsmith who can look over the firearm front to back and give you their thoughts on what it is. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it marginally informative. If you did, feel free to give it a like. If you didn't, feel free to give it a downvote, man. I'm cool. I got big shoulders. Subscribe to the channel. It's great. And share the video if you thought it was even worthwhile. I hope everything is well for you in these trying times. Stay safe out there. Take care.